Don't look now, but the Commanders are 7-2, breaking out the brooms against the Giants. Steelers preview tonight, and AP was cooking in the kitchen at the trade deadline. Let's have a podcast. Hey there, good evening. Welcome once again to Commanders Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk all things Commanders on and off the field. And as you know, typically we start our show with a lot of off the field stuff, but there's been so much on the field action as well as NFL trade deadline, which took place today on election day that we got to get to, as well as our Steelers preview and our week 10 picks coming up. For those of you watching along or coming back later on and watching the show, watch the bubble screen at the bottom as our little ticker. You can see the topics going by, so you can see what we're going to come up next, and as well as what we've already talked about. Whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, feel free to drop a comment into the box. Question, comment, concern. Let's talk some trash about your team, my team, what happened with our team today, as well as this past Sunday and coming into this coming week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Love the interaction, love the comments, love the questions. Feel free to drop it in the box and we'll get to you. So without further ado, let's be completely honest. There's not a whole lot of off the field stuff, right? It's probably a blessing. And, you know, as they say, winning kind of cures everything, right? Maybe to some extent. You don't have the issues. You don't have the drama off the field. No stadium news, nothing this. Ticket prices are going up. The JD5 bandwagon is alive and well and rolling down the street. So, you know, as we knew this past Sunday, we went up to the Meadowlands, I still call it, up to MetLife Stadium in Jersey, take on the New York Football Giants, and basically gave them, you know, kind of more than they could handle, right? To come out on top 27-22. It's kind of interesting that last week I predicted that the Washington Commanders would actually beat the New York Giants 28-20. So I wasn't that far off on score. It kind of felt like it was going to be a letdown game, a trap game, as many people would dub it. But, you know, let's be honest, it was a tale of two halves. The Giants did a lot of things well in the first half. They came out, they established the run. To their credit, they stuck with it. They stuck with it hard. They racked up a lot of yards, something like to the tune of 144 yards rushing in the first half. Not a lot of passing by Daniel Jones. I think in the first half alone, he was like 4 of 6 for like 12 yards. Didn't bode well much for the Washington Commanders because at halftime, Jaden Daniels was like 3 for 3 with 0 yards passing and 1 touchdown. So, but let's break it down. What happened in the Giants game? We'll get to the graphic on your screen in just a second because that played a huge role into the victory for the Commanders over the Giants. But as I said, we came out on top 27-22. How do we get that? Well, let's talk about it, right? Washington actually started off kicking off the game, giving the ball to the Giants. Giants went down the field, couldn't put anything together. Basically gave Daniel Jones that typical, you know, let's confuse him on defense. Let's give him some pressure. He's not going to be able to function very well, and that's kind of what happened, right? But coming back, Washington was able to get a decent little drive together, culminated in a 1-yard touchdown pass to Terry McLaurin, who accounted for 2 catches on the day, both of them being touchdowns. So, you know what? Even though he didn't have a lot of targets, didn't have a lot of catches, 2 for 2 touchdowns, I'll gladly take it. Not a whole lot of scoring for the rest of the first quarter. Second quarter, the Giants tied it up with a man-hurt 2-yard touchdown pass from Daniel Jones. Washington turned around, answered with a really good drive, capped off by an Austin Ekeler 1-yard touchdown run to make it 14-7. Right before the halftime, Giants punted the ball back to Washington. This has kind of been Washington's mantra so far this season that, teams think, hey, look, they're going to kneel, they're going to run out the clock, they're going to get some easy dump yards, call it a half. But oh, no. Cliff Kingsbury says, watch what I got up my sleeve. They put a decent drive together, something to the tune of like 70 to 80-yard drive before halftime. Capped off with a sweet dime from JD5 to Terry McLaurin for a second catch, second touchdown of the day, going into the halftime at 21-7. Now, whether it's the Giants, whether it's the Bengals, whether it's the Cardinals, you name the team that we've played so far this season, you've got to feel comfortable with our offense and at least a 14-point lead going into halftime. Now, the other thing that helped us out was Commanders were going to come out in the third quarter, getting the second half kickoff. So that definitely helps because, even though it's not a make or break drive to start the second half, it's definitely a positive when you can put a good drive together and culminate that with some points. But that wasn't to be. And, they swapped punts here and there and some field position. And then New York actually got on the board to start the second half with a field goal to make it 21-10. Washington countered with another field goal, make it 24-10. Hey, let's just swap back and forth here with some scoring, right? But then this is where it kind of gets crazy because that, look, we make the Giants look like Super Bowl contenders. We make them look like Hall of Fame players and a lot better than the team that they are, right? So Daniel Jones actually has a 2-yard touchdown run. Frankie Louvu was completely pissed off and more so at himself. The fact that Daniel Jones actually ran him over and he missed a tackle at like the 3-yard line. So you definitely knew that some payback was coming just because of that happening. And, he was definitely frustrated that he let that touchdown go and didn't just smash the quarterback at the 3-yard line. Washington countered with another 20-yard field goal. Austin Seibert has been money since week 2 when we picked him up after the debacle of our week 1 kicking woes. I think he's on a stat now of like 17 for 17, 19 for 19, under 30 yards. He's not the most accurate long kicker in that 40 to 60 yard range, but anything under 40 yards, the kid's money, right? New York then kind of makes it interesting with a 35-yard touchdown pass from Daniel Jones to Theo Johnson to make it 27-22. And then, it's just one of those deals where can they run out the clock? Can they get some yardage to not allow the Giants to score a touchdown to go ahead, and basically they sealed the win at 27-22. So, look, as we break it down, Jaden Daniels kind of did what he had to do. Went 15 for 22 at 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, both to McLaurin. Daniel Jones countered that with 20 of 26, 174 yards, which basically we're going to get into that stat later on about their pass defense. Isn't as bad as what everybody thinks it is, but Daniel Jones still did have 2 touchdowns. Chris Rodriguez was actually the star running back for the day, capped in with a little bit of Austin Eckler for some flavoring. And he had 11 carries for 52 yards. And Tyrone Tracy actually played in this game, had 16 carries for 66 yards, and what is probably one of the fastest concussion protocol clearings in the NFL in recent history, right? He took a really good shot last weekend, late in the game, which was actually a late game. And then, basically how he was able to clear concussion protocol that fast and then end up playing. A lot of questions were raised around the league as well as NFL insiders, but he played and he definitely had an impact. Noah Brown was actually our leading receiver with 5 receptions for 60 yards. And as I said, hey, look, even though he didn't have touchdowns, he led the yardage. Terry McLaurin had those 2 catches, both of them touchdowns. Put them together, it's a winning combination, right? Star rookie wide receiver Malik Nabers out of LSU was the leading receiver for the New York Giants with 59 yards on 9 catches. But then, you kind of look at it, total yardage was kind of basically the same, 358 for Washington to New York's 326. Kind of a balanced thing, right? But one of the things that kind of really jumps out at you was in the first half, time of possession really went to the New York Giants. Washington was able to flip-flop that and actually kind of even it out by the end of the game with 32 minutes to the Giants to Washington's 28. First downs were kind of even. Rushing yards, as I said, Washington gave up 140 in the first half, but only gave up another 24 in the second half. So, they've definitely tightened up the running game, run defense for the second half, and then basically allowed Daniel Jones to kind of basically pick and play a little bit more on the passing game in the second half. Third down efficiency, what was kind of one of our, I don't want to say worst games of the season, but not our best, right? We were only 5 of 12 on third down to the New York Giants, 6 out of 11. New York was 2 for 2 on fourth downs to Washington's 2 for 2. It's kind of interesting, but Washington now has a perfect fourth down conversion rate so far this season. So I think they're like 8 for 8 or 9 for 9, something like that. Kind of crazy, but it kind of is, right? We're going to get to the shared screen stat that you see here in a second. Each team punted twice. Each team basically had the same amount of penalties. And then the big thing, once again, is game management, ball control, no turnovers, no fumbles lost, no interceptions for Washington, one fumble lost for the New York Giants. So, what does the graphic on your screen mean? So, coming into this game, the Giants' defensive line was ranked 8th best in the NFL heading into Week 9's contest against Washington. And as you can see, it's super interesting that out of 8 of those teams, that Washington has 6 of them on their schedule. So 3/4 of that list right there, the top 4, and then the Bears and the Giants. Washington has either played this season, which means they've gone up against a stout offensive line or defensive line in their opponent. And going into this game, DeMarcus Lawrence, who's actually a defensive tackle stud for the New York Giants, was actually leading the league in sacks. So couple that with the linebacking core that the Giants have and the secondary that they have, which isn't as bad as what a lot of times they are in games or on paper, and they kind of play us very well, as I said, whether it's home or away, that, this contest looked to be a lot more difficult than kind of it was, especially in the first half compared to the second half. But we kind of did what we needed to do. Commanders' offensive line gave up 0 sacks in this game, 0, which was huge because we were expecting DeMarcus Lawrence to basically have at least 2 or 3, right? Maybe 2.5 sacks against us. We had our rookie left tackle coming back from concussion protocol, Brandon Coleman. We had Sam Cosmi, who's a little banged up, Allegretti, Biades, who had a dislocated finger last week, coming back, maybe not 100%. And those guys together collectively did an amazing job. Why is that also important? Because they gave up 0 sacks and they piled up about 150 rushing yards without star running back Brian Robinson, who was out another game due to injury. But it had to feel good for offensive line coach Bobby Johnson, a guy that was formerly with the New York Giants last year, who was ran out of town despite his group struggling mightily with injuries. So they basically had the injury bug last year. They have it again this year with their star tackle Thomas out for the season. So, it kind of basically became a nice little homecoming reunion, if you will, for offensive line coach Bobby Johnson, right? Couple notes, game nuggets, as I like to call them, from Sunday's win against the New York Giants. The win was actually Dan Quinn's 50th NFL win as a head coach. Really awesome to see in the post-game locker room. I don't want to say presser because it wasn't the press conferences yet, but just that film footage that you see on the local media of the coaches and the team celebrating, or vice versa if they're on the other end. But majority owner Josh Harris actually presented Dan Quinn a game ball, the first game ball to be given out in the locker room after the game for Dan Quinn's 50th NFL head coaching victory. With 2 fourth-down conversions in the game against the New York Giants in the first half, the Commanders are actually 11 for 11. There's the stat that I was looking for on fourth down so far this season. This is the first time since 1980, when the stat was actually started being tracked, that Washington has started a season for 11 for 11 on fourth downs. Now, they're not doing the tush push like in the brotherly love city of Philly. Basically, whether that's Jaden Daniels scrambling, whether that's some rollouts and hitting the tight end on a drag, you name it, giving it to B-Rob, Eckler up the middle. It's been a lot of different ways, but it's just amazing that Cliff Kingsbury has been able to dial up 11 successful plays to get that short fourth down yardage conversion. Dante Fowler's 2 sacks give him his 10th multi-game sack of his career in the victory over the Giants. The Giants came into Sunday's game leading the NFL with 35 quarterback sacks and left with only getting 0. Pretty big stat for us. And we'll kind of hit on that again, as you'll see in a minute. Why? Jayden Daniels, once again, was 15 of 22, 209, 2 touchdowns, 0 sacks, 0 interceptions, 0 fumbles, and the 128.8 passer rating for the day, which isn't too far from being perfect. I think the perfect passer rating was 158. Lamar Jackson threw that up in the Ravens game. By beating the Giants today, they completed the season sweep, which is the first time since, actually, if you kind of really go back to it, since the 2011 season, 13 years ago. Kind of crazy, right? The Giants had the ball exactly 4 minutes longer than the Commanders today. The Giants also gained 164 yards rushing to our 149, but we did force that one turnover by Daniel Jones, who fumbled the ball right before. It wasn't quite a bang play, but right before he went to attempt to pass, and he actually brought his arm back, but it never even had a chance of going forward, and it caused him to fumble. With the win, the Commanders now went to 7-2, to hold their spot atop of the NFC East. This is the first time Washington is 7-2 since the '96 season, when that team collapsed at the end of the season, unfortunately, finishing 9-7 and missing the playoffs. I got to think that even if we do kind of go 500 the rest of the season, because we have some hard games coming up, as well as some easier games, that we're still going to make the playoffs in the NFC, even if we don't end up winning the division and losing to the Philadelphia Eagles, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. Dante Fowler reached the 50-sack plateau and forced his 14th career fumble against the Giants. Jayden Daniels is the first Washington rookie quarterback to sweep the New York Giants. For all the quarterbacks that we've been through over the last 20 years, that's kind of a surprise, but I guess it kind of is what it is. Terry McLaurin, with his 2 touchdowns against the Giants, now has 31 in his career, becoming the 10th in franchise history for Washington with 30 touchdowns. It's kind of interesting also that in the fourth quarter, where Jayden Daniels kind of seems to shine for Washington, among all NFL quarterbacks so far this season in the NFL, he's first in completion percentage, first in yards passing attempts, first in the touchdown interception ratio, and well as first in passer rating in the fourth quarter, coming down the home stretch. So, as we alluded to, one of the things that's, another stat that's huge for us is ball control, right? Kind of looking at where we were before, looking at where we are now, is literally night and day between last year with EB and Sam Howell and this year with Cliff Kingsbury and Jayden Daniels, right? So as you see on your screen, the Commanders have only turned the ball over 3 times this season so far. That's the fewest turnovers by any team in their first 9 games since 1933. Basically the Sammy Ball era of the Washington Redskins, right? In the early to mid 30s. When turnovers were first tracked. Why is that important? Why is that significant? A, good ball control. B, it means that, the wide receivers aren't fumbling after the catch. It means that B-Rob's fixed his fumbling issues, knock on wood, cross your fingers, get your rabbit foot, since last year. Running backs are holding on to the ball. Jayden Daniels isn't getting rushed and hurried and sacked to the point that he's fumbling the ball as much as last year with Sam Howell. Because let's call it as it is, these 2 guys are calling a good game and executing a good game plan on offense. Because why? Because in the first 9 games of the 2023 season last year with Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy, we had 14 turnovers so far in the season to the 3 that you see mentioned on the screen so far. This needs to be talked about a lot more. What a difference that makes. What more momentum, what more yardage per games, and especially scoring, means your drives are more efficient. And even more impressive, Washington's doing it with a rookie quarterback under center so far this season in Jayden Daniels. The Commanders' offense, and kind of like I said, when you have less turnovers, when you have less interceptions, less fumbles, it makes your offense more potent. It makes them more efficient, and that's resulted in 49% of the drives reaching the red zone, which is number one in the NFL since at least 2000. 61% of those drives result in scored points, whether it's a touchdown or a field goal, which is first again in the NFL since at least 2000. And guess what? Over 50% of teams in the top 10 in percentage of drives to reach the red zone through week 9 made the Super Bowl that year. Now, while the stat kind of shows that the team is gearing or has the efficiency to reach the Super Bowl, I'm not 100% convinced that we are a Super Bowl team. Now, I am convinced that, look, teams get hot in the middle to the second half of the season. Teams ride that hot hand trailing off at the end of the season and going into the playoffs. Can that be us? Maybe it could. Teams with a good offensive line, good to stellar quarterback, but even more potent defense is what gives you that deep late season run to go into the playoffs. Look, let's be completely honest. The Detroit Lions are a force to be reckoned with. San Francisco is going to be tough, even though they didn't start out very good. They're getting CMC back this week, and they're going to be dangerous as always going into the second half of the season, right? Who would have thunk that the Cardinals are leading their division in the NFC West at 5-4? Look, just 2 weeks ago, the Seattle Seahawks were leading their division in the NFC West with their record. They lost last Sunday, and then they dropped the fourth in the division. Pretty crazy stuff, right? And lo and behold, the Eagles are kind of quietly putting their shit together over in the city of brotherly love to give themselves a 6-2 record, one game back of us in the NFC East. So there's definitely a lot of competition in the NFC, but we are one of the better talked about teams, one of the more potent offensive talked about teams, and just the culture is changing and the rebuild is already going basically as planned or ahead of schedule, right? So it'll be super interesting to see what happens with our team in the second half of the season. Just in case you wanted another crazy stat, because I'm always full of game nuggets and useless Jeopardy knowledge, as I say, according to True Media Sports, Washington is averaging 42.5 yards per offensive drive. So basically that means that, we have long drives, but, we're able to convert them, because the highest average for any offense in weeks 1 through 9 ever is that 42.5. So, it's pretty interesting that, we're not getting the super short field position. We're not getting, necessarily a lot of long or deep returns. Eckler is kind of doing his job, especially on kick returns, giving us some good field position. Had a 35, 40-yard run back against the Giants, which super helped out in the second half with one of our scoring drives in the second half to help us add a couple more points going forward. The other big thing that kind of goes with not only the turnover so far this season, but also the sack battle, if you will, when we talked about, giving up 0 sacks against the New York Giants and how much that makes it easier for Jayden Daniels to sit in the pocket, make his reads, do the RPOs, and et cetera, et cetera. Washington's sacks allowed through the first 7 games, even though we're kind of missing 2, but we can add that goose egg because of the Giants game. So far this season, Jayden Daniels only been sacked 16 times. Compared to last season, when we were basically leading the NFL in sacks against Sam Howell, was 40. Huge improvement for the offensive line. Bringing Tyler Biadasz in from Dallas to play center, as well as that, I think it was 4th or 5th round rookie left tackle Brandon Coleman, who's been absolute stud, even though he missed last week's game because of concussion protocol, played absolutely stellar this week for us. So the offensive line, as long as they can stay healthy, is going to be doing stuff that, we need them to do and be that cohesive unit that we need for Jayden Daniels and our rushing attack as we get into the meat of our schedule going into the second half of the year. As improbable as a Hail Mary is the fact that certain players, according to ESPN NFL insider Adam Schefter, said that have now begun to target Washington as a place they want to end up by the trade deadline, which was actually today at 4 p.m. So what does that mean? That actually means we get to allow Adam Peters, general manager, to do his cooking in the kitchen. Wow. What did, it was super interesting. Were we going to be buyers? Were we going to be sellers? Adam Peters came out at the beginning of the season and said, hey, look, I basically have this like 3-year plan to make us a solid contender in the NFC and the NFL. We're going to go through the draft. We're going to pick up a couple free agents here and there. We're going to, not overspend. We're not going to be flashy. We're going to do things the right way. And then basically kind of see what happens, see what kind of team we can put together on the field. Hopefully a winning team. Let's rebuild that culture under DQ, Cliff Kingsbury, and Joe Witt. And let's just go out there and have fun, right? And lo and behold, let's be completely honest that, Adam Peters, we were wondering if he was going to be a buyer or a seller today. If he was going to buy, we knew he wasn't going to do a lot of moves. Maybe one, at least one, maybe two. Wasn't going to be three, right? Where was he going to do? We knew he needed secondary help. We knew we could possibly pick up another wide receiver, maybe even an edge guy if one was available, right? So Adam Peters was calling, working his magic in the kitchen, trying to figure out who was available, what the compensation would look like. Even though Zadarius Smith went to the Lions, Washington was in those conversations. Even though Mike Williams went to the Pittsburgh Steelers, Washington was in those conversations. But who did Adam Peters end up landing for us in DC on trade deadline day? That's right. Stellar cornerback for the New Orleans Saints, or formerly the New Orleans Saints, now that he's with Washington, and that was Marshon Lattimore. Marshon Lattimore is probably one of the best or better cornerbacks, especially when we get into some of his stats coming up here, that you're going to see, basically when he plays that one-on-one, man-on-man coverage, that good shutdown corner that Washington needed. So that's going to allow, Benjamin St-Juste. It's going to allow Forbes. It's going to allow Ignabi. It's going to allow Davis to basically kind of rotate or excel as the number 2 cornerback and not necessarily always be up against the number 1s of the other team. So, when we play the AJ Browns of Philadelphia and the George Pickens coming up in Pittsburgh, and, if CD Lamb's playing when we play Dallas in 3 weeks, and, you can just pick the number one, that more than likely Lattimore is going to be on the field. Now, whether they line up specifically across from him and he mirrors somebody, he can play both sides of the ball, left and right. So it'll be interesting to see how Joe Witt uses Lattimore in that secondary against the opposing wide receivers. But, trading for cornerback Marshon Lattimore, we basically get a player that the New Orleans Saints reworked the contract before the season. So for the rest of this season, Washington's only paying Lattimore $605,000 guaranteed, and basically $36.5 million over the next 2 years. So Lattimore is actually under contract for Washington for the next 2.5 years. If you break that down the middle, which can be broken up, whether it's signing bonus, roster bonus, the whole 9 yards, it basically comes out to 18 to 18.5 million per season, which isn't bad when you're talking one of the better stellar cornerbacks in the NFL. How do we get to this point? Well, let's talk about it, right? And I might have to explain the bottom because it might get cut off a little bit, but because of my little rolling ticker, but we'll get there. So, according to NFL insider Adam Schefter, the full trade got New Orleans, Washington's 3rd round pick, Washington's 4th round pick, and in an early training camp, early season trade, when we made defensive tackle John Ridgeway to New Orleans, this trade gave New Orleans back their 6th round draft pick. Washington gets Marshon Lattimore and the Saints' 5th round draft pick. But there is some, always something cooking and brewing per Adam Peters in the kitchen, right? The full trade terms of that, let's kind of break it down even more. So we got, Marshon Lattimore and that 5th round pick. New Orleans gets the Commanders 2025 third and fourth rounds, and then 2025 sixth round in that Ridgeway, as I just said. But we still have, there's a lot of debate whether, we used the third round pick from Philly, which was actually via Miami, which would actually be a higher third round pick, or not. So Adam Peters did not turn the Jahan Dotson third round pick from Philly via Miami into the Marshawn Lattimore trade. He did even better. He traded the lesser of the Commanders our two 2025 third round draft picks. He kept the pick from Philadelphia via Miami, which would actually put us higher in the third round because Miami's not doing very well this season, and dealt one of the New Orleans own picks back to the Saints along with our original third round draft pick. Basically, he put on a master's class of swapping picks and draft capital for Marshawn Lattimore. Why is Marshawn Lattimore so important? Marshawn Lattimore has not allowed a single touchdown in coverage since the 2021 season. Welcome to Washington, Marshawn Lattimore. One of the things that was also super, and I pull up next gen stats and kind of use them as well, going here and there and everywhere, was the fact that Marshawn Lattimore has allowed a negative 12% completion percentage over expected when targeted as the nearest defender this season. And even going back into the last season as well, which is the third lowest among 75 outside cornerbacks. So basically he's in the top 3, right? Lattimore has been targeted on just 9% of his coverage snaps, the second lowest among outside cornerbacks. So basically, what does that mean? Or let's break that down. That means basically like when the quarterback breaks out of the huddle, goes up to the line of scrimmage, he's looking for Marshawn Lattimore. Is he on the left? Is he on the right? Is he up against my number 1, up against my number 2? Is he in man? Is he kind of dropping back in the zone? Yada, 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 right? It was interesting because whether, if you listen to different shows, podcasts, etc., I listen to the Pat McAfee show almost every single day. And it's kind of interesting because on today's show, Aaron Rodgers was talking about that exact thing as he was praising Budda Baker from the Arizona Cardinals, who they're going to have to play this week. And, he said, look, Baker is one of those guys, just like, when you broke the huddle, he said that, you always had to account for where Troy Polamalu or Ed Reed, or guys like that always were, Rondé Barber. And it's kind of interesting that, NFL quarterbacks are looking to see where Marshawn Lattimore is on the defensive side of things when they're breaking the huddle and coming out. So super interesting to see, how that's going to develop for us on defense. I'm glad to have him, glad we got him. And, welcome to DC. One of the things I found kind of interesting late this afternoon was actually Marshawn Lattimore and Terry McLaurin know each other very well. It's kind of interesting how the networks and the circles go back and forth amongst NFL players, but they were actually in the same freshman class together at Ohio State. They both redshirted that year, played together in 15 and 16 with the Buckeyes, and now Lattimore and McLaurin are back together in Washington. So it should be a really good combination for those guys, as they go against each other and practice. Real quick, we're going to take a break, talk about our next segment, Game Balls and Gassers. I'm actually jumped out of order a little bit, but our Game Balls and Gassers segment is brought to you by Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123, specializing in motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' compensation, personal injury claims. He has 3 convenient office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey, with one located in Philadelphia, PA, one in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, one in Pittsburgh, PA as well. If you need legal advice or legal representation, reach out to Jason. Tell him you saw us at Out of the Box Sports. He'll be glad to help you with legal advice, legal representation. Remember, if you don't win, he doesn't collect, and he'll be glad to help you out. That's Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. So as we go back to our game balls and gassers from the New York Giants game, obviously you got to give a game ball to Dan Quinn, picking up his 50th win as an NFL head coach. Look, he's probably going to be the Pepsi Rookie of the Week, but once again, wasn't glamorous, wasn't racking up 300 yards, wasn't racking up another 100 yards rushing. He did what he had to do, and with no turnovers and no sacks, Jaden Daniels gets another one. Rodriguez, who basically came off the practice squad, got elevated up to fill in for the injured Brian Robinson, did really well, led the team in rushing this past Sunday against the Giants. So, look, he's going to get another game ball. Even the defense as a whole, I would say I'd give one to, right? They were flying around. They were making plays. They weren't necessarily as good and clean as they probably should have been, but they did enough to secure the win and kind of hold on to that to get us to 7-2, right? Look, even though they were in the losing bracket, so to speak, I would probably even give one to Tracy, the running back from the Giants, who took a beating rushing the ball all day for the New York Giants. Did what he had to do, got a touchdown out of it, even though they only called his number so often in the second half. The poor kid, I think he's a rookie, took a beating, still racked up a ton of yards, and he's probably the only shining star, along with Malik Neighbors, who had some catches, didn't have, more than 60 yards, but had 8 or 9 catches to go with it. Gassers, probably the biggest one would be Ben St-Juste, cornerback for the Washington Commanders. That guy, he's not the world's worst cornerback, but he's definitely our number 2, number 3. But because of our secondary setup right now, or so far this season, he's kind of had to play the number 1 role, right? The only problem is he's really handsy. What's that problem correlate to? A lot of pass interference calls. And of course, look, he had one last week. He actually had 2 last week. He had more again this past Sunday against the Giants. And hopefully now that we have Lattimore coming over to be that true number 1 cornerback, it'll allow St-Juste to not have to cover the number 1s. But because of a lot of his kind of bad decisions last week against the Giants, he's going to get a gasser. There aren't really too many gassers to give out. Maybe Dante Fowler, because he whiffed on Daniel Jones on that touchdown run. I don't even want to say whiffed. He basically kind of got ran over by Daniel Jones. So I know he would definitely want that one back. But it kind of is what it is, right? The bigger thing that we're going to have to look at going into is this coming week, the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers are coming off a bye week, which definitely kind of worries me. Look, this will now be the 3rd team that we've played so far this season where they've been coming off the bye week. And, let's be honest, let's call it as it is. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a really good team. They're second in the AFC North only because the Ravens are doing unbelievable stuff so far this season, or else the Steelers will be in first place. Let's call it as it is, right? The Steelers are coming in 6-2. Their last game was 2 weeks ago, actually against the New York Giants. And they were 2-5 going into that game. But the Steelers kind of did what they needed to do. Russell Wilson was at the helm for quarterback for the Steelers then, and they beat the Giants 26-18. Now, like I said, the Giants aren't very good. The Steelers did what they needed to do, beating the bad teams, put some points on the board. Russell Wilson looked good, being kind of back up to his old self, spreading the ball around, had a good rushing attack, to get Najee Harris his 4th game over 100 yards. He had 114 yards on 19 carries. Pickens looked really good, kind of being rejuvenated after some dismal seasons under multiple offensive coordinators. And even the beginning of this season when Justin Fields was quarterback and now Russell Wilson's there, it's kind of day and night with those guys too, right? Russell Wilson kind of just brings that more dynamic atmosphere and aspect to the Pittsburgh Steelers offense that, he's able to stretch the ball down the field, a little bit more mobile than what Justin Fields is, as crazy as that sounds. Able to extend plays just like Fields was, but has more experience in making those reads. Hopefully a little bit, a better game management, so to speak, under his belt compared to Fields, but let's talk about what really brings Pittsburgh, and that's their defense, right? We know TJ Watt is that stud, that star on their defense. We know that they have a really good secondary. We know they have really good linebacking core. And that's kind of going to be our problem for us going into this week, right? The trade deadline today, the Pittsburgh Steelers picked up wide receiver Mike Williams, formerly of the New York Jets. It's going to be a solid receiver to go with George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, and Jefferson. But, even on the defensive side, they didn't think they were strong enough, so they went and picked up Preston Smith from the Green Bay Packers, former player of the Washington Redskins in that era. So, to help them out on a little bit, not if they weren't good enough on the edge, but to give them that just another depth and another solid edge guy, we're going to have our hands full. If our offensive line can basically take the performance against the New York Giants and that stout defensive line with Lawrence as defensive tackle and kind of correlate that and repeat that against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think we're going to do okay. Obviously, look, we're going to give up a couple sacks. I'm not expecting a 0 sack performance by the Washington Commanders. It's going to be, we're going to give up probably a sack or two to TJ Watt. We're probably going to give up a sack or two to somebody else. But our sack total isn't going to be above 5 or 6. I think our offensive line is going to be good enough that they're going to scheme a game plan with Bobby Johnson and the 5 starters to minimize the impact of the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive front. So are they going to get some hurries? Yes. Are they going to get some rushes? Yes. Are they going to get a couple sacks? Probably yes. If we can limit that to 5-6 sacks for the game, no interceptions by JD and not even fumbles, I think we're going to do okay. JD is going to have that same offensive approach going into this game that he always does. I think he's going to be well prepared. I think he's going to be a little more rested. He's going to be even another game into the healing process for the ribs. So I think he's going to do okay. I think you're going to see a lot of back and forth, a battle of field position, a battle of kicking. The good news is it's a home game in Landover. And, look, I'm not getting overly warm and fuzzy about this game. This game could easily go either way. I think the betting tables right now is only like 3 points in favor of the Steelers. So it's basically like a wash to the sports book. But, look, we're on the hot streak just like Pittsburgh is. Pittsburgh has a good defense. Pittsburgh has a decent to good offense as well. If we can stop, or I don't even want to say stop, but if we can minimize Najee Harris and that rushing attack, if Lattimore is even up to speed to play a couple snaps, even not necessarily the whole game in the secondary, and our defense plays kind of like what we did against the Giants, even though the Giants are the Giants, or even the defense can play kind of like what we did against the Ravens earlier in the season, I think Washington's going to come out. I'm going to call it the same score as last week against the Giants at Washington 28, Pittsburgh 20. Look, Pittsburgh's going to score some points. I just kind of feel that for some reason, JD and the offense are going to get on their little roll like they usually do and come out on top. This is a game that we don't necessarily need to win, but it'd be really awesome if we did, right? A lot of people would pick this game, especially early on before we knew what kind of team we had this season, as an automatic loss against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But like I said, I think we're just putting so much together right now this season, especially going into another tough game next week against Philly, that, we're going to win one of the two. I don't necessarily see us going 0 for 2 in the next 2 weeks. It could happen. Who knows? It's any given Sunday, right? But I just have something feeling says, hey, look, Washington's going to bring the heat at home, and we're going to jump out and win 28-20 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll see what happens. Should be a really interesting game for us in DC. It's going to Pittsburgh travels well. Their fans travel well. It's not that far from Landover to Pittsburgh. So there's going to be a lot of black and gold fans as well. But it's just going to be a matter of execution and consistency for our team to come out on top. As always, something I kind of started doing this season, and we're going to do it every week, down and dirty real quick, maybe a quick sentence or two about each game, but we're going to make our week 10 picks. I will say that I was doing really well on a 9-game parlay. There's like a couple games I didn't pick. But 9-game parlay last week until the Buffalo Bills kicked that last second field goal to win. But the Saints. The Saints blew it for me. That's what it was. And which resulted in head coach Dennis Allen getting fired the next day. But the Saints destroyed my 8-game parlay, or I would have hit it for big. But let's see what we got going on this week in week 10 of the NFL. Kicking off Thursday night football, the Bengals and the Ravens. Look, Joey Burrow needs a win. It's arguably one of the hardest next to the NFC North, one of the hardest divisions in the AFC especially. Ravens are just too potent. Ravens are going to win on Thursday night. Starting off the Sunday slate, it's going to be the Patriots at the Bears. Look, both of these teams are kind of underperforming so far this year. The Patriots kind of are what they are. We thought the Bears were going to be better. The Bears are at home. I think the Bears are going to rebound. They got to stop the bleeding. The Bears are going to win. Minnesota against Jacksonville. Man, Jacksonville lost another one of their star wide receivers last week to a broken collarbone. Minnesota's hot, just like the Commanders in Detroit. Minnesota's going to win. The Falcons and the Saints. This is kind of going to be interesting. A lot of teams, after a head coach gets fired, have a bounce back win. Derek Carr is going to be back at quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. It's home in New Orleans. Even though there's a change in coaching, man, I just don't see the Saints having that firepower to knock off the Falcons. So the Falcons are going to win and do what they need to do. Steelers at Washington. We just went over. Washington's going to win 28-20. The Jets travel to the Cardinals. Look, as much as I think the Jets are going to win, it's a long road trip for the Jets. The Cardinals are playing good ball right now, first place in the NFC West. Cardinals are going to win this game at home. Super loud stadium if you've ever been there. Awesome experience, and Cardinals will win. Detroit Lions at the Texas Houston, Sunday Night Football. Should be a good game. However, I think that, with Texas, Houston still missing 2 wide receivers. I don't think Nico Collins is back yet. Maybe, but he won't be 100%. Detroit just has too much firepower. Detroit's going to win. Game in Munich, Germany is actually going to be the Giants at the Panthers. This should actually be a good game, so to speak. The Panthers won last week. They also messed up my parlay as well, but that's neither here nor there. Giants are still trying to figure out who they are, what they are, when they are. And the Panthers just traded basically all of their wide receiving core. So, man, I don't know. They're both basically going to Europe, playing in a wild game. Let's call it the New York Giants put a win together against the Panthers. The Bills at the Colts. Last week's game wasn't very good for Joe Flacco as Anthony Richardson got benched. Josh Allen's just going to be too much for the Colts, even though the Colts have a good defense. The Bills. KC against Denver. Man, is this going to be the game where Kansas City gets upset from their perfect season? Could be. It's going to be at Arrowhead, though. But, those games in the AFC West are always good. I'm not a big Chiefs fan. Let's go with the Broncos, right, for the upset. San Francisco at Tampa Bay. The deciding game and actually Tampa Bay just took Kansas City to overtime last night in Monday Night Football. CMC could be back for San Francisco. It's on the road down in Tampa. Even if CMC comes back, he's not going to be 100%. It's going to be Tampa Bay at home. Tennessee and the LA Chargers. LA Chargers all the way. Just too much for Tennessee. The Eagles at the Cowboys. No Dak. Probably not no CD, as well as some other guys. Eagles are going to blow out the Cowboys again in Dallas. Jerry Jones is going to be completely pissed off and upset on the radio show Monday morning. Dolphins at the Rams. Unfortunately, the Dolphins are just kind of hitting this big sluggish spot. They don't know where they are. Traveling all the way to the West Coast. Sean McVay, Matt Stafford are going to put it together and beat the Miami Dolphins on Monday Night Football. Cleveland Browns, the Packers, the Raiders, and the Seahawks are all on a Week 10 bye. Right now, if the NFL draft were to take place, it's basically going to be New England with the top pick. There are 8 teams, 8, as crazy as that sounds, with the tied for the worst record in the league. And basically it gets broken down by strength of schedule. But right now, the draft picking order would be New England, Jacksonville, New Orleans, Carolina, Cleveland, Vegas, and the Giants. Those teams are all tied at 2-7. Nowhere in the top 18, or basically top half of the NFL draft order, is your beloved Washington Commanders. Pretty awesome, right? After the trade deadline swap of some draft capital today from Marshawn Lynch, the draft pick after the deal still leaves us with a first round, second round, third round, no fourth round for next year, a fifth, a sixth, and 2 sevenths. Still not bad. Even, maybe some more swapping before it goes on, before we get to the NFL draft next year in 2025. Real quick, we talked about the preview for the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up. After that, we are at Philadelphia against the Eagles. We're home against the Cowboys. We're home against the Titans. And then we have our bye week going into week 14. So definitely some winnable games coming up. Look, Dak's still going to be on IR when the Cowboys come to town. Tennessee just isn't that good, and we need to continue to be able to play well and put away the trash teams and get those wins. So, look, absolute worst case scenario, we should be 2-2 by the bye week. Hopefully, we're 3-1. We're going to lose either the Steelers or the Eagles, but I kind of feel like we're just going to get that momentum and take it to the Steelers this week. But, things may not go our way and we end up losing that game, but then we'll turn around and beat the Eagles, Cowboys, and Titans going into the bye. So there is a real worst case scenario. We are going 2-2 into the bye week, which would put us at 9-4 going into the bye week, with the potential of being 10-3 going into the bye week. Looking pretty good. All right. Just some housekeeping stuff before we wind down for the night. Tomorrow morning, Wednesday at 10 a.m., our good buddy Ken Fry is going to have the Bat Cave show talking about Mets baseball. For those of you baseball fans or NL fans, catch Ken on the Bat Cave tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Ken will also be back on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. with the Silver and Black Lair, the LA Kings hockey show that he puts together every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Kings haven't been doing too bad so far this NHL season, with former Washington Capitals goalie Darcy Kemper in goal most of the time for them. So it'll be interesting to see how he's doing out there in LA since being traded. And then kind of seeing what they're doing in the NHL. I follow the Capitals because they're the local team and they're my favorite. But it's always good to catch Ken, see what he has to say about his teams on tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for the Bat Cave and Thursday at 10 a.m. for the Silver and Black Lair LA King show. Little side note, and we'll remind people next Tuesday night as well, but yours truly will be on the Philly Press Box next Wednesday, November 13th at 7 p.m. as I join my buddies Chet and Bill to chat about the upcoming Eagles Commanders game. They were gracious enough to invite me on, and I'm actually going to have probably one or both of them on later on in the season when the Eagles come to Landover towards the end of the season. But catch me next Wednesday night, November 13th at 7 p.m. on the Philly Press Box, talking with those guys about the NFC East football contest coming up. Our next show is going to be Tuesday, November 12th, once again at 8:30 p.m. And last but not least, kind of going to be pitching it the next couple of weeks only because it's kind of near and dear in one of our bigger sports events. For those of you that don't know, I actually do sports memorabilia kind of as a side gig, side hustle, whatever you want to call it. And, we're always giving back to the community. And one of our biggest events every year is the Toys for Tots drive that we do. And this year, it's actually the 12th annual Toys for Tots drive, courtesy of Prince Frederick Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, and Ram in Prince Frederick, Maryland. Basically, what's the premise? You bring your toys, your unwrapped toys for Tots. Basically, we ask for one toy per autograph, or you can bring basically like a $50 to $75 cash or gift card donation. And in return, we bring a bunch of sports celebrities to the dealership to sign autographs and get pictures for free, right? So this year, we got Capitals Nick Backstrom, Braden Holtby, Devontae Pelly-Smith, Carl Alsner, and Craig Laughlin, the former Capital and color commentator for the Washington Capitals TV. And that event runs from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. There'll be Santa Claus. I'm pretty sure the Grinch is going to be there. A bunch of games for the kids. We usually bring a gaming trailer as well to the dealership, but it's always a good time. We usually fill a couple trucks and even a tractor trailer with toys throughout the day. We have a silent auction of our stuff as well. So join us in Prince Frederick, Maryland on Saturday, November 23rd from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Drop off your toys, make a kid's holiday, and get some free autographs. As I said, our next show will be Tuesday, November 12th. So be a friend, tell a friend, give us a share, give us a like, give us a follow on social media. You can find us through Out of the Box Sports on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. And until then, have a good evening and see you all next week.